Do, 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 do. All right, welcome everyone who is joining us on YouTube. You're here for Torah study with Rabbi Stern and Dr. Ruby. Uh, we're the two people who are here in the building today. So we'll start with our blessing for the study of Torah, as always. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Um, and we'll get started. I think we're in chapter 7. I think that's where we left off at the end of chapter 6. And of course, we had Michal and David and their little spat, where Michal was kind of upset at David for somewhat exposing himself in his jubilation at his return and his victory. And she chastised him, and he had not such nice words for her and her father and their family. And Michal would have no children after that. Uh, because of their quarrel, because they were estranged, because they didn't see each other again, however you want to interpret that. Um, and then we move to chapter 7. And now we're done with war, which is great, at least for the moment. When the king was settled in his palace and God had granted him safety from all the enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan or Natan, "Here I am, dwelling in a house of cedar, while the ark of God abides in a tent." So remember, he had built a palace. They built a palace for the king in Jerusalem. They made it out of cedars from Lebanon. Uh, and he says, it's not right that I should live in a beautiful building made of strong cedars that, it's like a real palace, and the Ark of God should live in the Mishkan in a tent, still in its temporary dwelling place. So Natan said to the king, "Go and do whatever you have in mind, for God is with you." Um, so it's important to note here that this is not God's answer. This is Nathan's answer. Nathan goes, "Well, you're pretty good with God, so you should just go do it, and I'm pretty sure it'll work out." But that same night, we see in the text in verse 4, the word of God came to Nathan. "Go and say to my servant David, Ko Amar Adonai," which we'll see a lot of now as we're getting more into the prophetic books. Ko Amar Adonai we'll often see it translated as "Thus says God" or "Thus says the Lord." It's the preamble, the prefix for prophetic statements. So when a prophet is going to prophesy, they begin generally with Ko Amar Adonai, right? So it's like, "Thus says God," to, it's not just every word they say isn't from God. When they're representing God, they generally say this. It's how I was able to tell you before that when Nathan said, "Go ahead and do it," he wasn't speaking for God. He was speaking for Nathan. Remember, everything prophets say isn't prophecy. Prophecy is only prophecy when it's coming from God and it comes true. And prophets otherwise are just guys. Besides when they're doing prophecy, they don't have any other particular special wisdom or knowledge. Some of them might, if they're like the prophet Samuel. Remember, Shmuel had been a priest also for many, many decades. So he had probably lots of religious knowledge and things. But that's not necessary that's not a prerequisite for a prophet. It might be a prerequisite these days for a rabbi, but not for a prophet. Knowledge isn't necessary and all that. So anyway, um, the statement is, "Are you the one to build a house for me to dwell in? From the day that I brought the people of Israel out of Egypt to this day, I have not dwelt in a house, but have moved about in tent and tabernacle." Not even the tabernacle in Shiloh is a proper building. even though its walls were made of stone, because the curtains of the tabernacle served as its roof. So it's like, to be fair, it's like, think about the big change you're asking here in the relationship between God and the people, right? No matter where the people went, God could be with them because God's house was portable. And God seems to prefer that. Remember in the Torah, earlier in the Torah, we read, um, why do we have when we build the Mishkan, the purpose of doing so is so that Shochanti b'tocham, so that God can dwell among God's people. So we're asking, David here is really asking for a major change in how Israelite religion works. Um, and then the statement of the prophet continues, as I moved about wherever the Israelites went, did I ever reproach any of the tribal leaders whom I appointed to care for my people Israel? Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Right? That's a fun statement for God. Right. I went and I did that. Did I ever say to any of these people, tribal leaders or scepters, or, to any of the heads of Israel, right? I never asked them to do that. I never said to Moses, hey, it would be better a house of cedar. Or hey, Joshua, you should really stop with the conquering so you can build me a house of cedar. Like, God's like, no part of this was ever about the house I'm going to live in. Like that wasn't. I don't care. I've never cared about that.
Arrogance is human, not divine.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Right? He's like, we're God. Like, and Nathan was like, oh yeah, do it. God really likes you. Whatever you want. And God goes, hey, Nathan, I never asked for this, and I don't really want it at this point either. And so that's what. So we're gonna get more in verse 8. Further, what else should the prophet say thus to my servant David? Thus said God, Adonai Tzavaot, right? Now we're getting that militaristic, the God of armies, God of hosts, we like to say, but we don't really call it outside of Game of Thrones armies hosts anymore. So it can be confusing. But yeah, so thus says the God of armies, I took you from the pasture, from following the flock to be ruler of my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut down all your enemies before you. Moreover, I will give you great renown like that of the greatest men on earth. I will establish a home for my people Israel, and will plant them firm, so that they shall dwell secure and shall tremble no more. Iniquitous people shall not oppress them any more as in the past, ever since I appointed chieftains over my people Israel. I will give you safety from all your enemies. Um, God declares to you, God will establish a house for you. When your days are done and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own issue, and I will establish his kingship. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he does wrong, I will chastise him with the rod of mortals and the blows of humankind. But I will never withdraw my favor from him as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed to make room for you. Your house and your kingship shall ever be secure before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Nathan spoke to David in accordance with all these words and all this prophecy. All right, so this is where we get the big line. You don't build it, but your son can build it, right? It's kind of, in a way, a small act of faith he's asking for you. He's saying, you don't do anything. If you believe in me, I'll make your son the king and he'll build the temple, right? So there's a lot of promise here. How much of it is conditional is up in the air. We get things like your throne shall be established forever, and the rule will be forever, which is where we get the idea generally that, of course, the future Mashiach will be Mi Beit David. Why? Because obviously, if the king of Israel is always going to be from David's house, then, or king of Judah anyway, then clearly this must continue. And so this prophecy had exactly the desired effect, which is what you would want of a pious king, right? The prophet goes and says something to him. The prophet said something to Saul. Saul might or might not listen to it, right? Whether it fit politics, whether it fit whatever. And what happens when David hears this prophecy? So then King David came and sat before God. And he said, "What am I, O sovereign God? And what is my family that you have brought me thus far?" Um, and the sages also take from this line that kings from the Davidic dynasty are permitted to sit in the temple, whereas no one else is permitted to sit in the temple, because he came and sat before God. Yet even this, O sovereign God, has seemed too little to you. For you have spoken of your servant's house also for the future. May that be the law for the people, O sovereign God. Very interesting. So it's very interesting because this conversation almost between God and David, it sounds like a great blessing. What else does it sound like? A negotiation, right? God says, okay, you don't build the temple, but your thing will be everlasting. You don't build the temple, but your son will build the temple. You don't, so this is it feels a little bit like a negotiation between Nathan and David. If you wanted to take it as political and not as David being a pious, great person, you could take it as this is negotiation. That the priestly class will continue to support David's children after David is gone. And in exchange, in other words, if you're David, there could be some concern that, well, sure, right now I'm picked, but Saul was picked. And Saul had children, and only decades later did Saul fall out of favor and get removed. So, what happens if God goes a different direction? Obviously, David can't do anything about that. But this feeling, I'm not saying it wasn't. Maybe he's a very pious guy. I'm just trying to throw different things out there. But it feels like it could be a little bit of a negotiation. And so this is David's way. Remember, of accepting deals. He's very we might call it today Trumpian in how he accepts deals. Right. Once he makes a deal with someone, he goes, "You're the best. Everything you do is the best. I'm so happy about it. God will bless you. I'm so glad that God has made all this possible for us. This is going to be great, right?" He's very effervescent with his praise once he comes. So it's like, yet even this, O sovereign God, has seemed too little for you, right? Who's he? He's talking to Nathan. He could be, I mean, he's theoretically talking to God, but he knows even if he is talking to God politically, he's also talking to Nathan, who is the prophet, who has his own base of power from which he can possibly even depose the king. So he's like, and again, he says, like, may that be the law for the people, right? Torah Adam. May this be the people's instruction. Um, right? And so it's very interesting. Yeah.
There's also, I think, an interesting psychological theme that I think it's starting to play its way through. Later, Nathan is the one who's going to confront David over Bathsheba and say, "You were that man," and David acknowledges it. Here he starts out with what might be seen as arrogance. I have a palace of cedar, okay, and yet he ends up saying with Nathan, "And to God, who am I?" His arrogance is balanced by humility.
Is balanced by humility if we see it as humility. Again, what my theory presupposes is that David isn't actually being humble here. He's just saying, like,
negotiating.
he's coming back around and saying, so what we're saying is everyone agrees I'm the best king, and my family should always be king forever, but I won't do this extra thing because if one guy does, there could be some concern that what happens when one man becomes everything to a people and a faith? They supplant God, right? I mean,
Right.
not saying there are other groups of people who have chosen to center a person too much, but if you center a person too much, sometimes you start to think maybe they're God, maybe they're a representation of God, and Judaism doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So I'm saying if you choose to view this from the political lens, what I'm saying is Nathan could be afraid, even God could be, that David, too successful and too unrestrained, could throw everything off. And God doesn't want that. God wants David to serve the purpose that David is supposed to serve, and not serve his own purposes. So this is kind of, I would say, if you're going to view it that way, this is the like, you know, this is the thing. Anyway, so he continues. He does continue here. David says, "What more can David?" He's speaking in the third person as he doesn't even say we at this point. He's not using the royal we. He's using the royal he's using the royal David. He's using, what more can David say to you? You know your servant, O sovereign God, Adonai Yod He Vav He. For your word's sake and of your own accord, you have wrought this great thing and made it known to your servant, right? This goes back into, again, from my political line I'm pushing here. I don't mean to push it, but again, what's he saying here? He's like, this is great. God has this wonderful plan that definitely involves me being great forever. That's the right. He keeps coming back around this thing, and you told me, right? Now, of course, you could say the piety angle. There's the piety and the politics.
Yeah.
The piety angle, you would say, of course, this is him just saying, you did it. God always makes right. So like it could be seen that way. I'm not trying to be here to make you feel bad about David. So anyway, you are great indeed, O sovereign God. There is none like you, and there is no other God but you, as we have always heard. Right? Ein kamocha ve'ein Elohim zulatecha b'chol asher shamanu be'oznenu. And this is where we get the other part that we see, and we've actually seen in our Talmud class here, when it mentioned mi chamocha, umi cha'amcha ki Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz asher halchu Elohim, right? And who is like your people Israel, a unique nation on the earth, whom God traveled, lifdot lo le'am, who went and redeemed, like this is lifdot, like when we for pidyon haben, when we redeem firstborn son. So this is the redeem word. As a covenanted people, thus winning renown and doing great and marvelous deeds for them, and for your land, driving out nations and their gods before your people, whom you redeemed for yourself from Egypt. Right? This is almost, we're basically doing here, this is like Kiddush, right? Almost, we're remembering the Exodus from Egypt. How great are you, God? And this is and this interesting perspective. We got Micha Mocha already, or Micha Elohim, like who is like you among the gods that exist. And here we're getting Micha Amcha Yisrael. Who is like your people Israel? Goy Echad, a unique nation. And this is a very, it's like this is really one of these first moments where we get someone thinking about what Israel can be and its relationship with God can be. Um, this is God in search of man.
Yeah.
In right, it's like a unique nation whom God went and redeemed as a covenanted people. Not just who was redeemed. It's not a passive thing. This is God actively going out and say, like, this is the people. I want them. They're a great people and unique among the nations. Um, so very interesting. And he continues, you have established your people Israel as your very own people forever. And you, O eternal one, have become their God. And now, O eternal God, fulfill your promise to your servant and his house forever, and do as you have promised. And may your name be glorified forever, and that men will say, God, Adonai Tzevaot is God over Israel. And may you, the house of your servant David, be established before you. Because you, O God of hosts, the God of Israel, have revealed to your servant that you will build a house for him. Your servant has ventured to offer this prayer to you. And now, O sovereign God, you are God, and your words will surely come true. And you have made this gracious promise to your servant. Be pleased, therefore, to bless your servant's house, that it abide before you forever. For you, O sovereign God, have spoken. May your servant's house be blessed forever by your blessing.
The art of the deal is
right. When you see it that way, like, could it be pious? Absolutely. But also it could be like, let's just be sure we're all on the same page about the deal that's been struck, the political deal that's been struck here today.
Yeah.
We can use whatever language of the day is important. In this case, it's clearly the language, if not, and maybe the intent also, but clearly the language of piety is the language of covenant and deal making also.
Yeah.
So it's not possible to tell whether is he saying this. He's like, thank you, God, we're going to do great things. Everything's great. Or is he saying, this is a good deal. This will work out. I don't need to build a house. My kid will build the house. I get eternal kingship. And that deal, that's worth it. Today, he's like, I'll do what you want. That's fine. I get eternal kingship. Saul never got that deal. So he's like, oh, because you could see if Nathan, maybe he's like, I got to keep doing more so that I can secure the kingship. And Nathan's going, you know what? You're secure. We're good. Don't build anything. You can go fight wars. We don't need you to build anything. So that's the whole of that conversation about the house. So Nathan and God get David to change his focus and not be focused on building the house. And David also is forgiven for having a beautiful big palace while the Mishkan is a tent that gets rained on. So yeah, now he gets to say, well, I tried to build a house for God, but the prophet said, not yet. My son will do it, which does the dual purpose of I'm a pious guy and my family's going to be kings for forever. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about?
Well, just a very striking point, and you featured it. As you read it, I was very struck. How can Nathan say something that's not so? But the prophet doesn't always speak in the name of God. Kol Amar Adonai
Right.
has to be there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the prophet can't lie, but he didn't lie to David. What he? Oh, you mean in the beginning when? Okay.
Yeah.
When he said, yeah, sure, go ahead and build it. Yeah. So that exactly is saying that was Nathan talking,
Yes.
not Hanavi. Right, not the prophet. That was really just, hi, I'm Nathan, and I think you're pretty cool, and God thinks you're cool too, clearly. So go ahead and do whatever you want. And that's when God's like, we don't tell the king to do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
The first rule of being God or prophet, never tell the king to do whatever he wants. That's a terrible idea because kings are really dumb. That's God's like number one thing is God's like, look, kings really dumb, terrible. It's a bad system in general. If you get a good one, it can be good, but like you have to get really lucky. Israel gets really lucky twice in a row. They get David and then they get Solomon, who are both really good kings. Unfortunately, after that, there are only two more good kings in the whole history of both Israel and Judah. and they're both Judean kings.
Yes. Hezekiah and Josiah.
Yeah, exactly. Hezekiah and Josiah are really the only two good kings we get after David and Shlomo, and the Northern Kingdom basically never does. Though to be fair, the Northern Kingdom gets taken over by the Omride dynasty at some point, which the Torah tries. I'm not saying the Torah is wrong, but the Torah says was legitimate. But if you look at history, it was clearly a coup. So like, it's like it's great if God went back and like made it kosher, but like Omri was a general who led a coup and took over the Northern Kingdom and then established a new dynasty that was unrelated to the previous one. Yeah. Anyway, again, we focus more on Judah, not so much on Israel. Okay. So chapter 8 we're at now. And it's time for war. We got to do more war. That's what a king does in the ancient world. That's like 70% of their job is doing war. Sometime afterwards, David attacked the Philistines and subdued them. You thought they were subdued already? Maybe they got strong again. Now they're down again. Is interesting. The Steinsaltz says it was Moab. But then later the other one says Moab. I don't know. Okay, never mind. I found it. David attacked the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Metegamah from the Philistines. He also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground, and he measured them off with a cord. He measured out 2 lengths of cord for those who were to be put to death, and 1 length for those to be spared. And the Moabites became tributary vassals of David. So he killed 2/3 of the soldiers, and he didn't conquer Moab. He didn't want to. The purpose of the war with Moab, which again, Moab, if you think of the map of Israel, Moab is like east bank of the Jordan River and south by the Dead Sea, not the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, but like just south of the Dead Sea and on the east bank of the Jordan River. And so he didn't want to take it over. He did want to destroy their military, and he did want them to, like with many kingdoms in the ancient world, he wanted them to pay him money, tribute, and that to be it. So they paid taxes to him. They didn't have a military anymore, and David was their tributary ruler. Which is fun also because his great-great-grandma was a Moabite.
That's right.
Right. So I wonder if he should have gone in and been like, well, I'm related to a Moabite, so give me Moab. But he didn't take Moab anyway. Okay. David defeated Hadarezer, son of Rehov, king of Zobah. God, the English and the Hebrew bear no resemblance sometimes. Zoba and Sova. It's like, give me some of the letters correct. Anyway, who was then on his way to restore his monument at the Euphrates River. So he was trying to extend his borders. And this war was waged far from the areas where so again, this is over by Iraq. Yeah. It's a wide kingdom, and so it goes over kind of to David, but it also goes all the way over to the Euphrates, and he was off on that side fighting this guy. David captured 1,700 charioteers and 20,000 foot soldiers of his force, and David hamstrung all the chariot horses except for 100 that he retained. Okay, well, that's unfortunate, but I'm sure they used those horses, I hope. And when the Arameans of Damascus came to the aid of King Hadarezer of Sova, this one says Hadadezer. Was the other one Hadadezer? Oh, it was. I said Hadarezer. It was Hadadezer of Sova. David struck down 22,000 of the Arameans. David stationed garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Arameans became tributary vassals of David. God gave David victory wherever he went. Although David sometimes had to fight on 2 battlefronts at once, his enemies often had the element of surprise. Doesn't matter. David always seemed to win. And here David installed the, senior officials in Aram, and Aram became another tributary of David. And so now Israel controls Damascus as well. David took the gold shields carried by Hadadezer's retinue and brought them to Jerusalem. From Betach and Berotai, towns of Hadadezer, King David took a vast amount of bronze. It says here copper, nechoshet, which is bronze or copper. Damn. Wow, that's really unfortunate. I was like, that's bronze, but it's also copper. So it's both at the same time. So which is it? Maybe copper. Okay, when King Toy, great name, of Hamat, heard that David had defeated the entire army of Hadadezer, and Hamat is a city-state in the center of Syria. It still exists in Syria. Toy sent his son Yoram to King David to greet him and to congratulate him on his military victory over Hadadezer, for Hadadezer had been at war with Toy. Yoram brought with him objects of silver, gold, and copper. Right? So what's happening? Maybe so. It's like don't fight us. We're just north of the guy you just conquered.
Yeah.
Maybe stop there. We'll happily work with you. Like these are gifts. Like let's work together. King David dedicated these to God along with the other silver and gold that he dedicated, taken from all the nations that he conquered. From Edom, Moab, and Ammon, from the Philistines and the Amalekites, from the plunder of Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Tzova. David gained fame when he returned from defeating Edom in the Valley of Salt. 18,000 in all. He stationed garrisons in Edom. He stationed garrisons in all of Edom. And all of the Edomites became vassals of David. God gave David victory wherever he went. You could also say, because it says, V'yosha, Adonai et David. So could say God redeemed David wherever he went, or God saved him wherever he went.
Okay.
But they gave him victory is a good interpretation. David reigned over all Israel, and David executed true justice among all his people. And it says he also engaged in acts of charity and kindness in addition to acting as a judge. That's why he executed true justice. And it says here, Oseh mishpat utzdaka. So he did justly and rightly is another way of saying it. That here it says executed true justice in mind, but he did justice and did rightly and righteousness. Right. Yoab, son of Zeruiah, was commander of the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Achilud, was recorder. Tzadok, son of Achitub, and Achimelech, son of Aviatar, were priests. And we all know from that big song that we all love from The Crown and that we hear at all the coronations of British monarchs. What's their song called? They play when they put the crown on their head. Tzadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anointed Solomon king, is what they sing, and then they sing hallelujah. As part of their coronation ritual. And of course, so keep that name Tzadok, son of Achitub, who's a priest, in mind, because he's going to play an important political role for the next generation. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, was commander of the Hachreti, the Heretites, and the Peletites, and David's sons were priests. Here it says priests, it says Kohanim. Interesting, Steinsaltz's translation, he translates that as senior ministers, saying David assigned his mature sons to various positions and they formed the core of his government. So maybe not priests in the traditional sense, but in the way we call ministers. Right, in those countries, they're called ministers, even in Israel. They're called ministers, but they're not like religious ministers, right? They minister to the so they priest to the state in a way, I guess you could say. Uh,
Okay, so
yeah, so any
At this-
questions from chapter 8?
at this point, the kingdom is extending pretty much from Egypt up to and including Syria.
Not quite Egypt, but from the area by the Sinai where it merges into the Israel.
Yes,
From
that's-
there and part of that Negev area,
Right.
and then over a bit into the East Bank and all up the East Bank, and then most, if not all, of the land of Israel, and then up into Damascus and Lebanon a little bit. And this is
east to the Euphrates or no?
no. He doesn't go all the way east to the Euphrates.
Okay.
He's only the East Bank is all his vassals now.
Okay.
Edom, Moab, and Ammon, which are the states on his partially it sounds like they had been conquered by the guy he beat. But after he installed new ministers there, but he doesn't technically. But that's like the extent of the Israel of the borders of the kingdom of Israel, including vassals. It's quite big at this point.
Yeah.
Almost pretty much at its maximalist position. It doesn't get much bigger than this. Yeah. But now we've got all the players. Now we get to chapter 9. David inquired, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul with whom I can keep faith for the sake of Jonathan?" Remember, Yehonatan, they had this covenant together. But he says, "I'm not trying to kill anybody. I'm not looking for them for the usual purpose a new king would find the members of the family of the old king." He's saying, "Look, I'm super famous now. God is secure. Everything is secure now. So I can fulfill so I'm able to fulfill my covenant with Jonathan. If there's anybody left, I can take care of them because as long as they're not rebels, because I'm not in the threatening, nobody's threatening me. I have kids, I'm super famous, I've conquered all this area, everybody loves me, I built a new, it's okay." There was a servant of the house of Saul named Ziva, and they summoned him to David. "Are you Ziva?" the king asked him. And he says, "Yes, sir," he replied. This servant is apparently not Jewish and oversaw the family's finances for many years. So I guess back in the day, the Jews went to non-Jewish accountants for help. We were mostly warriors then. We weren't really the big brainy types, totally, yeah. Anyway, so the king continued, "Is there any member of the house of Saul left with whom I can keep faith as pledged before God?" Ziva answered, excuse me. Ziva answered the king, "Yes, there is still a son of Jonathan whose feet are crippled." "Where is he?" the king asked. And Ziva said to the king, "He is in the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lo Devar." If it was low with an olive, I'd be like, don't speak of it.
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same. So King David had him brought from the house of Machir, son of Amiel, at Lo Devar. And when Mephibosheth, son of Yehonatan, son of Saul, came to David, he flung himself on his face and prostrated himself.
Will you stop for just a moment?
Yes.
Bosheth is shame. Mephibosheth means, do we know?
So it's so the meaning of the name is exterminating the idol.
Okay, that makes much more sense than shame. He's
Yeah.
Jonathan's kin after all.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So it's in you could also say if you wanted to take from that root, you could translate it as the one who destroys shame.
Yeah.
So it's like this is not the same guy, very clearly
Yeah.
is a different type of guy. And of course, when he gets there, he flings himself on his face, and David just yells his name out. It was Mephibosheth, and he replies, "At your service, sir." Right? Hine avdecha. Right? I am your servant. Um, David said to him, "Don't be afraid, for I will keep faith with you for the sake of your father, Jonathan. I will give you back all the land of your grandfather Saul. Moreover, you shall always eat at my table." This is generous because first of all, what was Saul's inheritance at this point? Like, who gets Saul's inheritance? Is it David, as he's the new king and married Saul's daughter? Maybe. I mean, rightfully, theoretically, he took everything else. You would assume take whatever. Oop, I screwed something up. Do do do. I don't know. It's fine. Okay. I think we're still on. Yeah, we are. Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of answers there. Um, but and also he gets to hang out with the king, right? So he does a double kindness for him. He not only gives him an inheritance, which again, who knows, it could have been his. Instead, David goes, "No, no, no, it's yours. You're the last son of Saul's son Jonathan, so you get all of his land and whatever. Obviously not not the kingship. That's going to stay with David, but the rest of it, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um so that's great. And Mephibosheth flung himself again on the ground, on his face, prostrated himself again, and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog like me?" In case you think that phrase is strange, the same phrase, of course, was used by David himself um, in front, asking Saul why he should be receive honor or why he should be treated in such a manner, using the same phrase of dead dog. So absolutely. So he says that, and so the king summoned Siva, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I give to your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and to his entire family." Right? David's already super rich at this point. He doesn't need whatever is left from Saul's whatever. Like obviously none of this is the treasury and whatnot. So it's whatever land and house and money Saul personally held. And he says, "Okay, well, I killed everyone else is dead also at this point. Like, it's not like he could divide it among other people besides his wife, who's the only other remaining." It's also funny, by the way, he says, "Who is left of the house of Saul that I can keep faith with?" And the prophet doesn't, Ziva doesn't, they don't go, "Well, your wife is the daughter of Saul. It would be cool if you were nice to her." He's like, "No, that's not going to happen. Anybody else? Is there anybody else that I can be nice to?" And they're like, "There's this one guy who doesn't have feet that work. You can go talk to him, or he can come talk to you. You're the king." But still, it's like it's funny to me. Nobody said, "Well, you are really mean to your wife, and she's a," it's like you could keep faith with her. I don't know. You already made a commitment, but anyway, yeah,
Some of this, of course, is done um, to make the series popular. But David and Paul's relationship in the house of David is very strongly played. They do it masterfully by understatement, but you feel the love between them.
yeah, for sure.
And here,
hmm
I'm struck too that Ishbosheth is lame. He's easy prey, and yet David is overly kind.
But that's also, I mean, like I keep thinking to the politics of Caesar when I analyze David. And I'm not suggesting Caesar read the life and story of King David, although who knows, based on some of this, he very well might have. King David understands politics in the best way. What else can Mephibosheth never be?
A warrior.
Right. And what do you need to be king? Right. So He's not any threat to David anyway. Would he still have treated him this way if both his legs worked? I'm not. I hope so, but I don't know. I don't know that any of us really know. It's, that's the thing. This is an easy guy to be nice to, right?
That's true.
There's no risk in being nice to this guy. He's not going to be the figurehead that rises up to rebel against you, because ain't nobody following a guy who, in the ancient world, who can't walk. I'm sorry. That's just the way it goes. Like, so he's like, great. He'll sit at my table and he'll be my mascot, and he'll be proof that even Saul's family loves me, since my wife won't be proof of that because we don't talk. Um, and it'll be good for me politically. And it's also a nice thing to do, right? So many of what David does, which is why I call it Caesarian, essentially in its political capacity, is both a nice thing to do that ensures loyalty and the most politically expedient thing. He tries never to sacrifice either of those. He tries to do what will be seen, and again, what's seen by the people is good. He's not Trumpian in the sense, sorry, I'm on the internet and I keep saying this, but he's not in the sense saying whatever I say is good, the people will say is good, right? Because he's not quite, this is the problem with absolute power, right? He's not an absolute monarch. God is above him. So since he's not absolute, he has to play politics. Louis XIV can do whatever he wants. So could the Tsars, because their power was absolute. Even though technically God was above them, they didn't have to worry about nothing. David, whatever he's building here, has to play some level of politics with what he does. So there's really good political reasons for what he's doing here. Also, he wants the support of the people, so that if he ever has to do something unpopular with the priests, let's say, or whatever, he'll have popular support. And he doesn't pretend that whatever he does will be supported by the people. He tries to do things that will what we would say in today's political parlance, which is kind of Trumpian in a good way, and I'll say that. He tries to find 80-20 issues to put himself on the right side of, that most people are going to be like, that's the thing to do, and then David does it. And the people go, we love that. And also, obviously, the priests love it. And so and they're like, well, if God loves it and the leaders love it and we love it, then it must be good. Like, I mean, it's like when you put those pieces together, how can anyone argue against it? And David always is doing this. It's whether it's intentional, again, whether it's piety or politics primarily is for you to decide. But it's very interesting here. He's giving him all this stuff, and he continues in verse 10. You and your sons and your slaves shall farm the land for him, and shall bring in its yield to provide food for your master's grandson to live on. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table. Ziva had 15 sons and 20 slaves. Right. He's like, okay, so he's a gentleman farmer now, Mephibosheth. He's like, sure, these other people will work the land and stuff, but like, I'm going to take care of him. Like, he's not going to be there. He's not going to be worried about it. Like, do your thing, but also the money goes to him. Ziva said to the king, your servant will do just as my lord the king has commanded him. Mephibosheth shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. And of course, Ziva here is saying, and in fact, I have always treated him with respect, and I never. What is he doing? He's trying to say, well, David loves this guy all of a sudden. I can't tell why, but I just want you to know I've always been good to him. I always treated him with respect. It says, I admit that I was afraid to claim his rights on his behalf, but now I'm happy to return all of his In other words, so like, kind of Ziva was in charge of all this stuff in the meantime, and maybe would have just kept it. And he had a bunch of sons and slaves. He was already become a rich guy off of this. So this is an interesting moment where it's like, but Ziva's like, I never tried to get rid of him, to take his birth. Like we weren't sure what it would be. We weren't sure how you would feel about it, but nobody here tried to take anything from anybody. Nobody tried to exclude him from what was rightfully his now that you've given it to him. Like, like he's just trying to to really parse through. It's like, because at the time, maybe it was like, oh, I'm going to take Mephibosheth's head. And then maybe what Ziva would have said to the king was, you were right. That guy was always a troublemaker. I never liked, like, who knows what he would have said. But in this case, he's like, no, no, no. I always treated him well. I never said, oh, you're a lame, your feet don't work and you're grandson of a traitor, or like, I never did any of that. Um, Mephibosheth had a young son named Micha, and all the members of Siva's household worked for Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, for he ate regularly at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. They by the way, they apparently repeat the lameness in both feet at the end, so that why you won't hear a lot more about him, though you will hear more about him in chapter 16 and chapter 19. But the reason he's not doing a ton is because he can't, like he's not going out with David places. Like he lives in the palace, probably in Jerusalem. He's like you see in medieval time, he's a guest of David's, right? He's a highly honored guest who's also probably not allowed to leave, right? If we're being like, he's a highly honored guest who gets treated like a prince and isn't allowed. It's a gilded cage. Because like read between the lines here, I want to know who's a house of Saul so I can control them and keep them only around people I hire to watch them. And they can eat with me at my table. And that's a wonderful honor. Like, again, like this guy is now a pretty honored and rich dude. He can't do anything with that really, but he already kind of couldn't because it's the ancient world and he has to walk with crutches. So like you won't hear a ton more, but you will hear some more about him. His story's not over.
And Mika is not the prophet we're going to learn about.
No. This isn't Micah. Okay. Mika, it's Micha either way, but it's not Micha, that Micha. It's just a guy named Micha. There's a lot of Jews named. Again, it's really funny because these days I feel like some people name Micah as a girl's name, but like Micah is a boy's name. Yeah, it's like this kid.
My middle name is Michael, which would be, I think, Michael.
Yeah, it's Michael, right?
Who is like God?
Right, and Micha is the shortened version of that. Micha, like with like the way you would do. So it's the same thing. Micha and Michael mean basically the same thing, which is like who is like God, right? Some people might see it as some people name their kid Micha because Michael is the name of the angel, and so maybe you don't want to. Some people, but those people, their English name sometimes will be Michael, even if their Hebrew name is Micha, because some people don't want to, because you call a guy Micha, and again, it's like if I had a son, I think at this point I would name him Michael, because of my father, but my original plan had been to name a son Nathan because I'm a nerd. And Nathan is the prophet that succeeds Samuel. And since my name is Samuel, I thought it would be nice if my son's name was Nathan. And I would want to name him Natan, not Nathan, because Nathan, who's Nathan? That's not a real person. Natan is a prophet of Israel. But when you name a kid Natan, you're really labeling them in American public culture. So it's one of those interesting decisions. So it's like, again, you name a kid Michael, what do you call him in Hebrew? Do you call him Michael? Do you call him Micha? I personally like Micha as a Hebrew name for Michael, but my father's Hebrew name wasn't anything like Michael. His Hebrew name was Avram Moshe. His name was Michael. So, could be anything. Let's see, how long is 10? Okay, we can do 10. It's only 19 verses. Sometime afterward, the king of Ammon died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. David said, I will keep faith with Hanun, son of Nahash. Son of the snake?
Is that Nahash's snake?
Yeah. Just as his father kept faith with me, the snake. He sent his courtiers with a message of condolence to him over his father. But when David's courtiers came to the land of Ammon, the Ammonite officials said to their lord Hanun, Do you think David is really honoring your father just because he sent you counselors? Why, David has sent his courtiers to you to explore and spy out the city and to overthrow it. So Hanun seized David's courtiers, clipped off one side of their beards, and cut away half of their garments at the buttocks, and sent them off. When David was told about the men, he dispatched others to meet them, for they were greatly embarrassed. And the king gave orders, "Stop in Jericho until your beards grow back. Then you can return." Right? The Ammonites realized that they had incurred the wrath of David. And so Ammonites sent agents and hired Arameans of Beit Rachov and Arameans of Tsuva, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Makkah, with both his 1,000 men and Tov's contingent of 12,000 men. On learning this, David sent out Yoav, the great Yoav, and the entire army of mighty soldiers. The Ammonites marched out and took up their battle position at the entrance of the gate, while the Arameans of Tzova and Rechov and Tov's contingent and Makkah took their stand separately in the open. Yoav saw that there was a battle line against him, both front and rear. So he made a selection from all the best soldiers of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. And the rest of the troops he put under the command of his brother Avishai and arrayed them against the Ammonites. Yoav said, "If the Arameans prove too strong for me, you come to my aid. And if the Ammonites prove too strong for you, I will come to your aid." Right? And this is where we get Chazak v'nit chazek, right? Let us be strong and resolute, right? Ba'ad amenu, for the sake of our people, uva'ad arei Eloheinu, and the land and of our God, and accept the outcome that God deems right. Yoav and his troops marched with him Europe and his troops marched with him into battle against the Arameans, who fled before him. And when the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they fled before Avishai and withdrew into the city. So Yoav broke off the attack against the Ammonites and went to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they regrouped their forces. Hadadezer, still around, I guess. Is this the same? Oh, and some editions do say Hadarezer. That's very weird. Sent for and brought out the Arameans from across the Euphrates. They came to Helam, led by Shovach, Hadadezer's army commander. David was informed of it, and he assembled all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and came to Helam. The Arameans drew up their forces against David and attacked him. But the Arameans were put to flight by Israel. David killed 700 Aramean chariot teams and 40,000 riders. He also struck down Shovach, Hadadezer's army commander, who died there. And when all the vassal kings of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they submitted to Israel and became their vassals. And the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. So he resubmitted all these people. It sounds like it was really an uprising. Sounds like all of these groups, including groups that had previously submitted to him, decided it's time to test him. Didn't work out. David beat them all, and they were once again his vassals. Thoughts?
Can't quite put it into words other than it was all necessary and born of a conspiracy plot.
Sure, but also you got to think, like, the point was they wanted their freedom, right? They wanted to be free of Israel's control. So you can understand that, and you can understand why David said, "I'm not sure, I'm not going along with this. We need that money. We need all this stuff. This is how the economies of these states work at the time. If you want to grow, you need vassals." And vassals are easier. You don't have to run the place yourself. You don't have to absorb that people. They can all stay there. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined online. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful Shabbat.